Well, Matthew Ho is a former captain in the US Marine Corps and a former State Department officer. And I'm pleased to say that he joins us now from Wake Forest, North Carolina. Thank you for giving us your time, Matthew. So I want to draw on your military expertise and just to I really wonder what you make of what's going on at the moment. So we've got the US president saying that he hasn't put a deadline on this ceasefire. Perhaps we should start there. What do you think is going on from the US side of things?
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you, Louisa. One of the few things we can say with any certainty about warfare is that it is uncertain. And of course, Donald Trump is famously unpredictable. But what I think is occurring here, and we still may see a negotiated settlement, we still may see a return to conflict. But I think what you have today is a modus vivendi that the three major sides, Israel, the United States, and Iran, can live with. And so I think each side has something that they can take back to their constituencies and say, this is victory for us. And so I think when we talk about Donald Trump and, the uncertainty of what does this ceasefire mean, I think it means that it allows for the President of the United States to say to the American people, we stood up to the Iranians. I'm the first president who's ever been willing to do that. We put them back in their place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that is what victory looks like for him. Now, this modus vivendi also extends to Iran, where they can, they have control of the Straits of Hormuz. They have that toll. So essentially they have sanctions relief, as well to the Israelis who have their conquest of Lebanon they can point to. And so I think this is a status quo that all three sides can live with until the next crisis arises.
Matthew, that sounds like you're hopeful that then because of that, the talks in Islamabad, the second stage, may well go ahead at this time?
I would think so. I think there's the opportunity, maybe not tomorrow or this coming week, but certainly I think what you have the opportunity here is for all sides to have a way to save face and get out of this war. Again, a way to say to their people, their constituencies, we're winning, or we won, or we stood up to them and we put them back in their place. I mean, say for the Americans, this blockade, this is Donald Trump's ability to say how we are really enforcing our ability to keep the mullahs in Tehran, as they would say, from earning money to sponsor terrorism around the world, right? You can understand that rhetoric, how that would be pitched, even though, as we know from the Financial Times today, that 34 Iranian ships have passed through the American blockade and the Americans have only seized 2 other ships. So even though in reality, it's a porous blockade, it doesn't even really exist. One of those ships that was seized was 400 miles southeast of Sri Lanka. How that relates to the Persian Gulf, But, for the American public, they're not going to be aware of that. And so Donald Trump can pitch something like the blockade as being a sign of victory. And again, the same can be said for other aspects of this war, or for the Israelis or for the Iranians to make their case. And we can certainly get into what this means for Lebanon, Hezbollah, both the Lebanese government, as well as the Gulf states.
I mean, when we speak about it like that, it sounds rather childish, doesn't it? But behind the scenes, there's a lot going on, for this stalemate that we've got to at the moment in the Strait. I'm just wondering, you served in the US Marine Corps. I wonder, of course, as many people are, you're generally anti-war, of course. But in terms of the mistakes that the US have made militarily, what do you think that they've done wrong here?
Well, this is something that predates this war, Louisa. You have an American military that is overextended around the globe. You have an American military whose planes and ships are manufactured by a military-industrial complex that seeks to make profit rather than build weapons to protect American interests. And you could see this in a host of different ways. You could see how poorly the American Navy performed against the Houthis in the Red Sea, not just under Donald Trump, but also under Joe Biden. I mean, so this superficiality of the American military existed before this war. Certainly, we can point to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Vietnam, others, where the American military was unable to achieve the objectives that it was given. And so you have an American military that came into this war poorly led, unable to meet objectives put forward to it by its political bosses, supplied and maintained by a defense industry that is there just for the profit. You have an American Navy, just to give some examples here, you have an American Navy that has 10 aircraft carriers, but only 3 are available for this war. And one of those is a Gerald Ford, which has been at sea since June. So she's approaching 11 months at sea when those ships usually are only out at sea for 6 months. I mean, so you can point to examples like this to show again how the paucity, the superficiality, the paper tiger that the American military is. And certainly that doesn't diminish the fact that the American military can kill a lot of people. It can bomb a lot of buildings. It can destroy tens and tens of thousands of targets. But to what point? To what purpose? What can it achieve? And I believe, and I know others do as well, that the American military is really only able to fight for about 6 weeks, and that this ceasefire, among other reasons, was predicated or needed because the American military needed to rest, it needed to refit, it needed to resupply, it needed to rotate in new ships and new Air Force squadrons. And so I think as people look at this war and what this war means, and I'm one of those, Louisa, who believe that this war will be seen as a war between the 20th century and the 21st century. You'll see the Americans fighting this war to preserve a 20th century American empire using 20th century tactics and operations and strategies, while the Iranians can be viewed as representing the 21st century in all different forms.
That's really interesting. And it's interesting also that you mentioned that the US may be or may have been buying time, because that's exactly what Iran accused them of doing. And then before we let you go, I just wonder what you think then that Iran has done wrong here, or perhaps what they've done right.
Well, the Iranians were able to set out objectives that they could achieve and then build a strategy to achieve those objectives. So they knew that they couldn't fight the American Navy at sea or the American Air Force in the skies. And so they built missile and drones fleets over decades and prepared. They exercised a great degree of strategic patience to employ those weapons in a way that they could offset American and Israeli and Arab state advantages. But more importantly, more proximate to this we're talking about here, the Iranians understood that the way that they were going to achieve deterrence in the future, the way that they were going to achieve regaining their sovereignty, if you will, to basically make it so that a war against them in the future would be impossible, would be to put such economic and political pressure on the Americans that such a war in the future would be impossible. And they did this by putting objectives of, we're going to cause an energy crisis, which they were able to do, which didn't just have regional effects, have worldwide effects, as well as we're going to cause a political crisis. And you see that in the political stress that erupted, not just between America's allies in the Gulf, but between America's allies in Europe, as well as in the Pacific. The amount of political and economic stress, say, being put on Japan and South Korea because of this war is massive. Right. So, you have to give credit to the Iranians for understanding the Americans, understanding their weaknesses, and then designing objectives and creating strategies to achieve those objectives. And so when you put that up against how the Americans have fought this war, you really see what a mismatch it was. And so now I think the argument that Iran is a world power is something that the world has to contend with for good or for bad.
And that's definitely not what the US set out to do, for sure. But we shall keep across the second round of talks and see if it does go ahead. We really appreciate you taking us through all of that. Matthew Hove, a former captain in the US Marine Corps and a former State Department officer, we thank you.
Thank you, Louisa.
Now, Iran